I'm here as a parent. I've lived in Oak Park for 8 years. And by the way, my kids are learning active listening in D97. I don't know if anyone can tell who's actively listening tonight. I am here because a trustee on this board, Mr. Maroney, has been telling the public that public safety, all of our safety in this community, is important to him. In fact, he took an oath to defend the Illinois State Constitution, which addresses freedom of speech in Article 1, Section 4. All persons may speak, write, and publish freely, being responsible for the abuse of that liberty. I'm here holding Mr. Maroney responsible for his choices after hearing him on a recent podcast with a hate talk radio host, not to mention his CBS interview. He didn't use those as opportunities to advocate for equity or demonstrate that he understands the urgency of it. What he did is volunteer himself as a martyr in a free speech narrative, and he positioned himself as our community priority. By overreacting in this way to what was a moment of personal discomfort, Mr. Maroney not only pulled focus away from topics of community importance, but he dangerously escalated a situation which now finds Oak Park targeted by white supremacists. We are less safe after the Maroney media tour. This outcome of increased risk, actual risk to his fellow Oak Parkers was entirely predictable. Yet he could not resist strategically exploiting a tense moment when honest words about something very important made him feel harmed. Here are just a few online comments putting a target on our whole community. And each trustee can have a copy. As we speak, trolls continue to trash and threaten our village and people who live here. In this community where Mr. Maroney surely knows that a white supremacist hung recruiting posters on public sidewalks last year, his behavior was very irresponsible. Now, I understand the socialization reasons why white men are quite unaccustomed to being told your voice doesn't belong at the center of some topics. And I mean it when I say I realize that that can feel very startling and uncomfortable, but I stand with the many Oak Parkers who believe that you owe our community an apology for the reckless way you handled your moment of personal discomfort. I moved here to Oak Park for the values that Oak Park advertised, and now trolling white supremacists focusing on this village threatens those values and people personally and directly. Leadership reflects attitude. Your attitude has been, at best, passive and at worst, negligent toward calling out the sexist and racist under and overtones that have reared its head in local government for far too long. That lack of leadership does not just put Trustee Buchanan in harm's way, it sends the message that the women and girls' voices in our community don't matter. Thank you.
So I'm here today in support of the brave women who spoke up at the last meeting in the face of white men going back and forth about the definition of systems of oppression. And if you want a good definition of a system of oppression, it's when a white man who feels that their power is challenged takes that to other white men who want to maintain the white balance of power and oppress those who are trying to help finally have the proper seat at the table. That is a system of oppression right there. And as a white man, I know that I have to shut up. There are times when the thing I can do is shut up and listen. And that is my responsibility as a white person in America. And as a white person in power, it's even more important.
There are people in this community who have expertise in this field through deeply humble learning in academic and community settings, through years of explicitly working to create more equitable institutions, or through living their entire lives with marginalized identities. You've heard from many of them repeatedly at this microphone and in other spaces over the past 2 years as we urge you to take action on racial equity. But the men at this table have consistently ignored, mocked, silenced, and misrepresented the voices calling for change. Your inability and refusal to learn about basic concepts connected to equity, diversity, and inclusion is embarrassing and an insult to anyone who holds a marginalized identity. Now, I know what the mayor will say in his next condescending lecture to the women in the audience here, that we're being divisive. This line about being divisive is basically Oppression 101. It's a line used by those in power to diffuse or silence difficult conversations about why things might need to change. But perhaps there is a divide that we have helped to expose. This town is moving forward on racial equity. We see it in the school districts, the library, the township, and our young people who are fighting for their futures. The community of Oak Park is moving forward on racial equity, but this board has decided to dig in and refuse to move, and that is widening the divide. This community is moving forward while the men on this board use their privilege to minimize, dismiss, and actively shut people down in order to keep us bound to the past. Your cowardice, willful ignorance, and lack of leadership is appalling. Make no mistake, we will keep moving forward on racial equity as a community. Your participation thus far is upholding racism and the status quo. So Simone, obviously Susan, and most especially Arthi, keep speaking truth to power and don't back down. We are with you.
I sincerely hope Ms. Buchanan and her fellow trustees can learn and grow from this very regretful incident and better represent our community going forward. Trustee Petticola, you recently directed your fervor at Trustee Maroney, calling his behavior vile, reprehensible, and Brett Kavanaugh-like. Some of you might be wondering what horrendous act drew such outrage from Trustee Petticola. It seems Trustee Maroney had the audacity to conduct a very thoughtful and respectful interview on a local radio station to discuss the events of the last board meeting, which, as we all know, received local and national media attention. Trustee Maroney is not to blame for the negative press and opposition voiced by fellow Oak Parkers to Trustee Buchanan's views. Her own actions and words are responsible for the overwhelmingly negative response to her actions at the prior board meeting. And Trustee Buchanan, I just say the hateful language and threats and everything I'm deeply opposed to. I'm sorry you're going through that. Trustee Petticola, instead of using social media as a weapon to vilify anyone who isn't in lockstep with your exact views on an issue, or God forbid, not as zealous as you are on that issue, try having a respectful dialogue with your fellow trustees and citizens whom you were elected to represent. In 6 short months, you've managed to paint Oak Park as an oppressive, racist community in critical need of social reengineering. Oak Park, the poster child for diversity and acceptance. Your acts and words have been extremely divisive, and you're hurting our community.
If you give him time to speak, please.
You preach tolerance, yet are completely intolerant of anyone who you deem is in your way. If you or any other member of this board cannot represent all citizens equitably, then please resign your position. We deserve better representation. In closing, I regret to say that after 17 years calling Oak Park home, my family's decided it's time for us to leave this community. Not because we live among people of different background, skin color, or economic position, people who are tolerant of all, but because of the groundswell of self-righteous, zealous citizens who are intolerant of anyone they view standing in their way. I had hoped that those people are a small yet vocal minority, but I fear I may be wrong. Thank you.